Everybody, and welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Caitlin and I upload 3 times a week on this channel. Wednesdays are fashion and lifestyle videos, Fridays are weekly uni vlogs, just a week in my life at university, and then Sundays are my Unsolved Sundays where I discuss some sort of solved or unsolved true crime case. And today I'm back with another one of my Unsolved Sunday videos. Today is going to be a very long one. So last week I did a whole mystery week where I uploaded a video on a mystery case every single day of last week, so if you haven't already seen that then definitely go check it out. So there's 8 Unsolved Sunday videos there for you. Throughout the whole week I had loads of people complaining, like commenting, saying that my videos were really short and I wasn't doing the cases properly, and I just wanted to mention a quick little disclaimer here that because I knew I was uploading every week, and also you have to bear in mind as well that I am currently in uni, so I am doing exam prep, coursework, I've still got assignments, and then my exams start next week, so please bear that in mind. But I just would like to say that I purposely had the slightly shorter cases, the cases with less information and less theories on them, to do for the whole week, because uploading like a 25-minute case every day would have just taken way too long. So just wanted to put that quick disclaimer out there. But today I'm actually doing what I predict is going to be an extremely long video, so you might want to grab a cup of tea. I've got my coffee here ready because I have a lot to talk about. For today's video we're going to be discussing the case of the Oakland County child killer. Now, I think one of you actually suggested this to me, so thank you so much for that suggestion. I honestly write down all of your guys' suggestions. I have a massive list of future cases to do, so if you have a case, solved or unsolved, just one that you find interesting, then don't hesitate to DM it to me or leave it in a comment on a video somewhere, because I promise you I will write it down. So this case, there is a lot to discuss. It's technically unsolved. There is one particular suspect that I will talk about at the end that a lot of people believe is the most likely, perpetrator, who is the real identity of the Oakland County child killer, but I'm going to discuss it all. There's quite a few victims and things to go through, so I'm literally just going to get started now. It's going to be a long one, so if you want to hear a little bit about the case of the Oakland County child killer, then keep on watching. So between the years of 1976 and 1977, a total of 7 children were abducted and killed in different locations in Oakland County, Michigan. 4 of these 7 victims were confirmed to be linked to the same perpetrator. 2 were later ruled out as having nothing to do with the particular perpetrator that killed the other 4 victims, and 1 was believed for a long time to have a link to the 4 victims but was later disproven. So that's kind of just the case of the 7 children. I'm going to go into each one individually, even though not all of them are linked, because I just think they should all have their cases heard. There's a lot of names in this video, so I apologise, names, places, anything like that if I pronounce them wrong. Thank you so much for all the people who always correct me and things, but just be aware that if someone's already commented it in the comments, then you don't all need to keep reminding me. I put in this little disclaimer out now that I can't promise that I will always get the name pronunciations right. The first case is that of a 16-year-old girl. Her name was Cynthia Cadeiux. I don't know how to pronounce that, I'm so sorry. She disappeared in Roseville, Michigan on January the 15th, 1976. Around 8:30 p.m. on January the 15th was the last sighting of Cynthia alive. And then the next morning at around 1:05 a.m. a motorist was passing through Bloomfield Township in Oakland County, Michigan, when he came across her body. She was found naked and her skull had been crushed in with a blunt instrument. Cynthia unfortunately had been raped and sodomized, but it was later believed that the perpetrators of these awful acts against this young girl were actually the acts of more than one person. Her clothing was never discovered. There were rumours and speculation that Cynthia had actually been abducted by a group of 4 individuals who were known to take part in criminal activities in the local area. A lot of local people believe that these 4 in particular raped her and then left her on the side of the road, and as a result of completely different sort of MO, there was not really any evidence to suggest that this was anything to do with the Oakland County child killer. It was later ruled out as having anything to do with the 4 victims, or the 4 known victims of the Oakland County child killer. So unfortunately Cynthia was just attacked brutally and unfortunately lost her life at the hands of whoever knows, someone else. It's absolutely heartbreaking, but I just thought I would discuss her case and mention it briefly in this video. The second victim I'm going to talk about is a young girl whose name was Sheila Srock. Sheila was a 14-year-old girl. She was an orphan and she lived with her older brother in Oakland County, Michigan. The pair of them actually lived in Birmingham, Michigan, which was on the kind of north end of a place called the Woodward Corridor. Now, this is a prominent kind of location in this case because along the Woodward Corridor, if you search it up, you'll find like an image of it. It's just a long stretch that kind of covers all of the county. There are loads of different areas in which it meets, loads of different access points, and along this Woodward Corridor, this massive stretch of land was where each of the victims were last seen and found. So that is kind of where the Oakland County child killer committed his acts. So Sheila, at the time of her attack, was actually not in her own home. She was in a nearby home on a street called Villa Street, and she was babysitting, and she was with the baby in the top one of the top rooms of the house. While she was babysitting alone, a man entered the house after he had already entered and broken into 3 other houses in the area. A witness later described him as being a thin, young, white male who was aged around 18 to 25 years old and was believed to be around 5'10" to 6 foot tall. He had a sparse beard, prominent nose, and a pointed chin. The man who entered the home upon discovering Sheila forced her to remove her clothes. He then raped and sodomized her and then killed her with a small caliber pistol. And what's absolutely awful is that all of this entire attack was witnessed by a neighbour who had been standing on his roof at the time. He was shoveling snow on his roof just not far from the house, and he had a clear view of inside the room where the act was being committed. And unfortunately, because he was on his roof, he couldn't help until it was too late. After murdering Sheila, the attacker left the house with a couple of pieces. He took a few things from the house, including jewellery and a .38 pistol. Now, as he left the house, he was able to kind of blend in. There was a crowd of people that had surrounded the house after hearing the gunshots just of nearby neighbours. He managed to blend in with this crowd in order to aid his getaway. So he blended in. He apparently spoke to a few people, kind of asked them what was going on, what the gunshots were, kind of just appearing like he was a concerned neighbour or a passerby. After making sure that he didn't arouse any suspicion as to, his involvement in what had happened, he moved himself out of the crowd, walked towards a 1967 Cadillac that had been parked down the street, got in and drove away. Despite this being an absolutely awful case and also having a link to the Woodward Corridor, this case was later disproven as having anything to do with the man known as the Oakland County child killer. A man named Oliver Rhodes Andrews actually later confessed to the murder and attack of Sheila, and he is currently serving a life sentence in prison for his crimes. The third victim I'm going to discuss today was a young girl named Jane Louise Allan. Jane was 13 years old and she was last seen in her home in Royal Oak, Michigan. This last sighting was on August 7th, 1976 at around 12:20 p.m. That afternoon, Jane hitchhiked 17 miles to her boyfriend's house. Her boyfriend's name was Tony Gillespie and he lived in Auburn Heights, Michigan. When she arrived at her boyfriend's house, Tony said that he wasn't happy with her hitchhiking her way to his home. He said that she wasn't safe doing so and he wanted her to promise him that she wouldn't do it again. Not long after she left Tony's house, to his knowledge, she was going to get a lift back to her home, and it's believed that she didn't do so. This was the last time that she was seen. 4 days later, on August 11th, 1976, a girl who was believed to be around 17 years old, her body was found floating in the Miami River in Ohio. Her hands had been tied behind her back using pieces of white t-shirts to secure them. She was later identified as being Jane Allan due to clothing, jewellery and a previous distinctive injury led to a confirmation of her identity. The coroner's report stated that Jane had been dead before she'd been thrown into the river, and the cause of death was originally potentially believed to be due to carbon monoxide poisoning. And due to the level of decomposition that she was found in, unfortunately they couldn't determine if she had been assaulted before her death. There were rumours circulating at the time that Jane could have potentially been linked to a girl who had been spotted with a motorcycle gang. Their names were the Dayton Outlaws, but this link was never confirmed, whether this unidentified girl that was seen with them was Jane or whether it was just another girl. The most likely scenario is that she had lied to her boyfriend, told him that she was getting a lift home when in reality she hitchhiked back to her home, in which she fell across the wrong person's eye line and unfortunately was murdered. There is also another possibility that perhaps she was hit on the side of the road, but the carbon monoxide poisoning would suggest otherwise. So Jane's case has never been officially linked to the other victims, but it is strongly suspected to be. Some people believe that perhaps this was kind of like an early murder before a distinctive link was discovered. The next victim was a 12-year-old boy. His name was Mark Douglas Stebbins. On February the 15th, 1976 at around 1:30 p.m, Mark Stebbins left the American Legion Hall in Ferndale, Michigan and began heading home to his home in Ferndale. His mother had spoken to him just before he had left the hall, and it wasn't until around 11 p.m. that she made a call to the local police department informing him that her son hadn't arrived home and he should have been home like hours ago. It wouldn't have taken him that long to get home. I have a description here of what he was known to be wearing that day. He was wearing a blue hooded parka, blue jeans and a red sweatshirt and black rubber boots. He was believed to be around 4 foot 8 inches tall, weighing around 100 pounds, with reddish blonde hair and blue eyes. 4 days later, on February the 19th, 1976, a man whose name I can't pronounce, it's Mark Botigheimer, I'm really sorry for butchering that, left his office in Southfield, Michigan and began his walk home, and unfortunately he came across what was later discovered to be Mark Stebbins' body. On his walk he crossed through a car park where he initially saw what he believed to be like a dressed mannequin that had just kind of been discarded and left on the ground. But it was upon closer inspection that he realised he'd come across the body of a young boy, after which he swiftly returned back to his office and called the police department. The body was determined to be Mark Stebbins, and the autopsy actually revealed that the cause of death was asphyxia by smothering. It also discovered 2 small lacerations on the back of his head. His wrists and ankles were also appeared to be discoloured, which was believed to be rope marks, like they had just completely discoloured his joints because he'd been tied up tightly. And there were also a number of lacerations around his anal orifice. During the investigation, authorities interviewed a bunch of local residents around the car park just to see if they'd seen anyone, in hopes of someone having seen maybe a car or a person dropping the body off to help later identify the attacker. Now, a man named Mac Gallup claimed that at 9:30 that morning he had walked his dog through that very same car park. And he said that if the body had been there at 9:30 a.m, his dog would have smelt it like from a mile away and gone over to investigate it, so he would have been alerted of the body earlier, which means that the body would have had to have been placed there after 9:30 a.m. in the few hours before it was discovered. The murder of Mark Stebbins was the first confirmed case linked to the murders that occurred along the Woodward corridor, in association with the man or the person known as the Oakland County child killer. Just over 10 months later, the second linked case appeared. On December 22nd, 1976, 12-year-old Jill Roberson had an argument with her mum inside her home in Royal Oak, Michigan. The argument was about household chores that Jill had failed to complete, and as a result, Jill's mother had told her to get out of the house and only return when she decided that she wanted to be part of the family. Jill went to her bedroom, packed a bag full of her clothes and kind of necessities, and also a blanket. I have a description here of what she was wearing that day. So she was wearing blue jeans, shirt, boots and an orange winter coat and a blue knitted cap with a yellow design on it. She took her backpack that day and she left home with these few items. Her mother had expected her to return just maybe a few hours later that same day, because it was a seemingly harmless fight that resulted in just like childlike behaviour, storming out the house. It's not unheard of. I know I did sort of similar things as a child, so her mother hadn't expected her to stay out long once everyone had cooled down. When she didn't return home that evening, Jill's mother became concerned, and then at 11:30 p.m, Jill's father, who is divorced from her mother, actually officially reported her as missing. On December 26th, 1976, at around 8:45 a.m, Jill's body was discovered alongside Route I-75 in Troy, Michigan. A killer had laid her on her back on the side of the road and shot her in the head with a shotgun. She was still wearing the backpack that she was seen leaving home with. The autopsy carried out on Jill's body determined that the cause of death was shock and hemorrhage due to the shotgun bullet, and there was no signs of sexual assault. There were a number of reports after this came out of people claiming to see girls around Jill's age matching her description similarly in a number of different cars along the motorway, but none of these were ever confirmed. One major aspect of Jill's investigation that kind of remains unaccounted for is that Jill's bike was found a day later on December 27th, 1976. It was discovered behind some offices in Royal Oak, Michigan. It's unclear whether she kind of rode it there on the 22nd and that's where she'd headed off to, or whether it had been placed there in hopes of maybe hiding it some days after. The third confirmed victim was a girl named Kristine Mihelich. I'm sorry if I've again mispronounce that. Just 1 week after the discovery of Jill Robinson's body, a woman named Deborah Ashcroft called the local police department in Berkeley, Michigan, claiming that her daughter Kristine had gone missing. Kristine was only 10 years old at the time. She'd left her home at around 2 p.m. that day. She had left to go to the 7-Eleven store that was just super close to their house, and then she hadn't returned home after this trip. The woman working at the 7-Eleven store vaguely remembered selling a magazine to a girl matching Kristine's description at around 3 p.m. that day. On January 21st, just 19 days after she'd gone missing, the body of Kristine was discovered. A mailman was delivering mail in Franklin Village, Michigan, when he noticed something sticking out of a snow-filled ditch along the side of a road. As he got closer, he became aware that it was actually the body of a young girl. The autopsy determined that the cause of death was asphyxia by smothering, like one of the previous victims. The body was not completely frozen through, which suggested that she had been exposed to snow just under 24 hours before. There's also no evidence of sexual assault. The technician working on her autopsy actually made a note of how clean and neat her clothing was. Despite the fact that she'd been missing for 19 days, every part of her clothing, including her underwear, was extremely clean and neat. Kristine's mother went on record saying that she believed that someone other than Kristine had dressed her. Her mother claimed that she'd been dressed in clothes that she wouldn't normally be seen wearing, and there was no way that she would have been able to keep them clean for 19 days. On March 16th, 1977, another child from nearby area of Birmingham, Michigan was reported as missing. Timothy King was an 11-year-old boy who lived in Birmingham. He was last seen at around 7:40 p.m. on that day by his older sister. His older sister's name was Catherine, and she had given him 30 cents to go to the local shop to buy himself some sweets. All of his family members had plans to be out that evening, so as he left the house, he asked Catherine to make sure that when she left the door very slightly ajar, just so that it wouldn't automatically lock and he could let himself back in afterwards. When his parents returned home from their meal that day at around 9 p.m, they found the door still ajar and no sign of Timothy. By the next morning, there was a task force set out to find the young boy. The young girl that had been working at the shop that he'd gone to remembered selling him some sweets, which means that he most likely encountered some trouble on his way home back to his house. A witness came forward and said that around 8:30 p.m, she had been filling groceries into the back of her car in a car park just near from the store where Timothy was last seen. She recalled seeing a young boy in a red jacket matching the description that Catherine had given authorities. She believed that she'd seen him talking to a man by a car just a few spaces over from where her car was parked. She was able to provide a detailed description of the man she witnessed, and they were able to come up with a composite sketch. She recalled the car as being a dark blue gremlin with a right upswept stripe, sorry it's really hard to say, known as a hockey stick stripe just along the side. Timothy's mother made an appeal on TV, just kind of went absolutely viral across all media channels, saying that when Timothy returns home, she would feed him his favourite meal, Kentucky Fried Chicken. At 11:15 on March 22nd, 3 witnesses called the local police department claiming that they discovered a body in Livonia, Michigan, and the body was later identified as belonging to Timothy King. Just a few metres away from where they found his body, they also found his orange skateboard that he'd left with on that day. The cause of death was officially listed as smothered, like the other confirmed victims, and when the medical examiner first examined his body at 2 a.m. on March 23rd, he determined that Timothy had been dead for between 6 to 8 hours before this. The autopsy discovered that he had actually eaten a meal about an hour before he died, which was later discovered to have actually been his favourite food, Kentucky Fried Chicken, which is an absolutely, it's a terrifying thought considering the appeal his mother made publicly, saying that she would be feeding him Kentucky Fried Chicken. His wrists had marks that appeared as though he had been bound, although his body was completely clean, and he had also been sexually assaulted with clear signs of abuse. So now I have a list here of bullet-pointed kind of patterns that were believed to have been noticed between these 4 confirmed victims that led investigators to believe that they had been abducted and killed by the same perpetrator or perpetrators. They were all taken when they were alone, and they were all also taken from areas near car parks, also kind of in business areas. They were all held captive for anywhere between 3 and 19 days. They all appeared to be well fed in the hours prior to their death. They had not been subjected to exposure to the elements, so the harsh weather like snow or anything, which suggests that they had been held captive in a safe environment or like a seemingly well-covered environment. As well as this, they all appeared particularly cared for. Specifically, Timothy King's body was noted as being meticulously clean. Everything about his body had been almost surgically clean, and his nails had been scraped clean as well. So there's a little bit of discussion as to why him in particular had been cleaned so thoroughly. 2 of the victims were abducted on a Sunday afternoon and the other 2 on a Wednesday evening. There was no sign of particular force when each of the victims had been abducted, so it hadn't been like a surprise attack. More likely that they had been kind of chatting to the killer. All had been dressed in their own clothing that appeared clean, with some suggesting that they had been dressed by someone else. Female victims showed no signs of sexual assault, while both of the male victims appeared to have been sexually assaulted, which is again a huge discussion point. So there's a lot of theories, or like kind of, yeah, a lot of discussion points around why this could be. Each of the victims' bodies were left on the side of a road where they would be easily found and easily discovered. However, there are also a number of things that actually disprove the 4 being linked, which again I have a list of here. Jill Roberson was murdered using a shotgun. Now this is completely different to the other means of murder that the other victims face, all of them being asphyxiated or smothered. It's also a method that is particularly noisy, so shooting her on the side of the road is most likely to draw attention to it. Some also point out that the lack of sexual attraction to the young females, as opposed to the complete sexual attraction to the pre-adolescent boys, alone suggests that there were 2 separate killers. However, a lot of people argue that there are killers out there who are happy, or who do murder both genders despite only having a sexual attraction towards one. However, a lot do still argue that most serial killers do not stray from their particular victimology. Another point is that there is a clear inconsistency of the timings of each of the attacks. So Mark Stebbins was murdered in February of 1976, and the next one was not occurred till December of that year. The next was January 1977, and then the following was March 1977. And also there was a complete, the difference in times that they were held while in captivity was just completely different. There's no logic there, it's completely random, so some argue that this actually is an indicator of it not being the same killer. Some professionals argue that the cleanliness of 3 of the victims was simply an effort to remove any DNA evidence that could incriminate them at later points after their body was discovered, whereas the meticulous cleaning of Timothy King was actually the result of an obsessive cleaner, someone who needed to sterilize things, which suggests 2 completely different killers. So I'll leave a link to a blog down below that Timothy King's sister Catherine actually created. There's a lot of information on there if you want to give that one a read. There's also a documentary that's been created by Timothy King's family. It's called Decades of Deceit. In this documentary, the family make claims of the local authorities being particularly uncooperative and doing poor work in general and not really helping the case. All of the proceedings from the documentary were actually put into something called the Tim King Fund. Sorry, I mispronounced that. Tim King Fund, which the fund actually goes to child abuse and helping any other child protective services in Birmingham, Michigan. So in addition to making this documentary, the King family also spent around, I think it was $11,000 on FOIA documents, which by definition are documents that provide a right of access to information held by public authorities. So in theory, this had the intention of the King family receiving all of the documents held by the local authorities in terms of in relation to their investigation into their son's death and similar cases, in hopes of kind of receiving a full understanding of their investigation, because they believed that they were being kept in the dark with a lot of things. When they received the FOIA documents, they were heavily redacted, which means that basically they didn't learn anything that they'd hoped to learn. Barry King also filed a few lawsuits over the years, so if you want to look into that, there's a lot of kind of fight with the actual local authority, so definitely look into that. It's quite a lot of information. I won't really go into it now because there's a lot of back and forth, but if you're interested in sort of the lawsuit side and just the law prosecution side, then give that a read. That's worth looking into. Right, so the final part of this video, I'm going to just mention the main perpetrator theory, the main name and individual that people believe was the man who was known as the Oakland County child killer, assuming that all 4 of these confirmed victims were killed by the same person. Chris Bush was one of the most argued suspects in this case. His father, H. Lee Bush, was the CFO of a massive company called General Motors. In 1977, Chris Bush had been living only 2 miles away from the Woodward Corridor, which is obviously where all of the attacks occurred. January of 1977, he had a number of sexual misconduct charges against minors placed on him. There were pending charges, and these charges against minors were across 4 different counties in Michigan. So the counties were Midland, Montmorency, Genesee and Oakland. At the end of January 1977, a friend of Chris Bush's, his name was Greg Green, he was arrested in Genesee County for raping a child in August of 1976, so the previous year. While Greg Green was in custody, he announced that he knew who murdered Mark Stebbins, which was one of the known victims of the Oakland County child killer, and he named Chris Bush as being the perpetrator of the act. As Bush had these previous sexual misconduct charges pending against him, he was already known to the local authorities in Michigan, and he was ultimately picked up and held in custody with a $75,000 bond. During his time in custody, Bush announced that there were particular areas in which he preferred to pick up children for him to molest. He then went on to name 3 places in which Stebbins, Mihelich and Roberson were all last seen. Bush then took a polygraph test for to be able to kind of determine whether he was just lying, whether he was playing with authorities, or whether he was telling the truth. This test was administered by an inexperienced examiner, and the results eventually came out as incorrect. So the examiner misread them, or just was, like I said, he was inexperienced, and he came forward and said that Bush had been telling the truth and that he was the murderer. However, in following years, 3 more more experienced examiners looked at the results of the polygraph test and determined that he was actually being untruthful and that he was lying. There's a lot of speculation about kind of the reliability of this because of obviously all that hassle and the mistakes and things, but also polygraph tests aren't 100% accurate. So there's other things that we need to discuss sort of aside from the polygraph test. Despite having these pending sexual misconduct against minor charges against him sort of pending, ready for him to be taken to court, as well as being listed as a huge suspect in the murder of Mark Stebbins, the county decided to release him from jail and send him back to his hometown with a $1,000 bond. So they reduced his bond from $75,000 to $1,000. Greg Green, his accomplice or friend, remained in prison where he died in 1995. So from this point, Bush lived in a really exclusive area. It was simply known as the Village, and this meant that Bush lived only 2.4 miles away from where the last known victim of the Oakland County child killer was last seen. A number of years later, a hair on one of the victims, discovered on one of the victims, later led to a match of a man named James Gunnels. He claimed that he'd been molested by Bush quite a few times, like many years before. He claimed that his hair had only been found on the body because he'd spent a lot of time in Bush's car. Also, further evidence to sort of incriminate Bush was that his car was very similar to the one described by the woman who claimed to have seen the man that was talking to one of the victims. The car that was believed to be belonged to the killer was a blue Gremlin with a white hockey stripe along the side. Very similar to this, Bush actually owned a blue Vega with a white stripe on the side. So this could have potentially just been a mistake, like an honest mistake by the woman the witness. So a lot of people think that perhaps that this was actually just pure incriminating evidence and it was simply a mistake that led to authorities looking for the wrong car for many years. In 1977, Bush appeared in court for his pending sexual misconduct charges, and he pled guilty to each of the 4 pending charges and was granted probation for each of the cases. Then on November 20th, 1978, Chris Bush was found dead in his home, found in his bed wrapped up in his own blankets. It appeared that he'd shot himself in the head with his rifle, because the rifle was found there and he had a bullet wound in his head. However, there was later discovered to be no evidence of gunshot residue on his hand. In his bedroom, they discovered a number of things, potentially what people believe linked him to a number of the victims, including shotgun shells, potentially linking to the murder of Jill Roberson. There were also loads of rope tied into ligatures, which believed to link to all the victims who had shown evidence of being tied up. Also, most notably, was a large drawing on his wall, and the large drawing was of a young boy in a hood who appeared to be in pain, screaming. He actually had his hood up, and that was kind of what was most noticeable about this. Now, the boy had a huge resemblance to Mark Stebbins, who was also last seen wearing a hood when he went missing. And what was really also strange about this is that Chris Bush was known to have no artistic talent whatsoever. Bush also owned a white Welsh Terrier, and all 4 known victims were found with white animal fur, like evidence of white animal fur on their bodies. Not all hairs from each of the victims were found to be from the same animal, but there were people that said that over the years Bush owned a number of different animals, so it could have been further evidence to suggest that they had at some point been in Bush's home. Bush's father and mother also travelled a lot, which meant that he had access not only to their large home but also to their, I think it was like a holiday cabin or holiday cottage or something around the area, which meant that he had loads of locations that he could take these children to molest without raising any suspicion, with no neighbours. Everything was secluded, so he had locations and access to these locations to be able to do so. So that is the biggest kind of perpetrator theory. Let me know what you guys think, and that's actually where I'm going to end this video today. Like I said, this is probably one of the biggest cases that I've ever discussed because there is just so much to talk about. So there was no possible way that I could cover everything in this video, but let me know down below sort of your theories, if there's some other perpetrator theories out there, just other theories, and whether you think it was one killer, whether you think the Oakland County child killer is an actual person or whether it's actually multiple people. So let me know everything you think down below. I hope you guys found this interesting, and also leave me any videos, any like future cases you want me to discuss. I will see you guys soon for another video. Bye.